That night, I lay in bed with my eyes closed, thinking about David and how he could do this. I remembered his calm smile, the same smile he had given me just hours earlier. And I wondered whether the man I had married had ever really been who I thought he was. Earlier that evening, everything had seemed completely normal. David came home from work, placed his keys on the table, and greeted me with the same relaxed expression he always had. There was no tension in his voice, no sign that anything was wrong. Just the calm, ordinary man I thought I knew. We sat together during dinner, talking about small things like work and weekend plans. He laughed at one of my jokes, and for a moment, everything felt exactly the way it always had. But later that night, something happened that quietly shattered that normal feeling. I wasn't looking for anything suspicious. In fact, I had never even imagined I would need to. But when I picked up David's phone from the kitchen counter, a message appeared on the screen. And the moment I read those words, something inside me went completely still. It was a short message, but it carried a weight that made my heart sink. And in that moment, staring at the glowing screen in my hand, I realized I might not know my husband at all. When I think back to the first time I met David, it doesn't feel like a romantic moment at all. In fact, it started with something much more ordinary, a small accident that could have easily been forgotten. It was raining that evening, the kind of slow, steady rain that makes the streets shine under the streetlights. I was leaving the grocery store with 2 heavy bags in my hands, trying to reach my car before the rain got worse. When suddenly one of the bags slipped. The bag hit the ground and oranges rolled across the wet pavement, scattering in every direction. For a second, I just stood there staring at the mess, already annoyed at myself. And then someone stepped into the rain to help me pick them up. That was the first time I saw David. He didn't say anything dramatic, didn't even introduce himself right away. He simply crouched down, picked up one of the oranges, and handed it to me with a small, polite smile. Like helping strangers in the rain was something he did every day. Looks like they were trying to escape, he joked quietly, placing the last orange back in the bag. I remember laughing, partly because the situation was ridiculous, and partly because he seemed completely calm standing there in the rain, as if nothing about the moment bothered him. For a minute or two, we stood under the small store awning, waiting for the rain to slow down. It wasn't a long conversation, just small talk about the weather and how unpredictable it had been that week. But there was something strangely comfortable about it. Before leaving, David simply nodded toward the parking lot and said, "You might want to hold that bag from the bottom this time." And then he walked toward his car. I honestly thought that would be the end of it. But a few days later, I saw him again in the same grocery store aisle, standing in front of the fruit section like he couldn't decide what to buy. And when he noticed me, that same calm smile appeared on his face. "Looks like the oranges didn't scare you away," he said. That small coincidence felt harmless at the time, just one of those random moments that happen in everyday life. And I had no reason to think it meant anything more. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder if that meeting had really been an accident at all, or if David had simply been better at appearing in the right place at the right time. For a while after that second meeting, seeing David around the grocery store started to feel almost normal. At first, it seemed like nothing more than coincidence, the kind of thing that happens in small neighborhoods, until I realized it kept happening a little too often. A few days later, I saw him again, this time in the parking lot while I was loading bags into my car. I almost didn't notice him at first, but then I heard his voice behind me asking if the oranges were behaving themselves today. And when I turned around, he was smiling the same calm smile. We talked for a few minutes beside our cars, mostly about ordinary things like work and the unpredictable weather. The conversation was simple and relaxed, yet there was something about the way he remembered small details that caught my attention. For example, he remembered exactly what I had been buying the first time we met. Not just the oranges, but the cereal box that had fallen out of the bag as well, which felt oddly specific for such a brief encounter. At the time, I brushed the thought aside. Some people just notice things more than others. And David seemed like the kind of person who quietly observed everything around him. After that day, we started talking whenever we happened to see each other in the store. It was never planned. never arranged ahead of time. Yet somehow our visits always overlapped. Sometimes it was a quick hello near the checkout line, sometimes a short conversation in the produce aisle. The strange thing was how easily those short conversations stretched longer than expected, as if neither of us was in a hurry to leave. So we walked to a small place across the street and sat near the window while the evening traffic moved slowly outside. The conversation that night lasted nearly 2 hours, and by the time we left, it felt like we had known each other much longer. David told stories about growing up in a quiet town, about moving to the city for work, and about how he preferred peaceful routines instead of busy social circles. Everything he said sounded simple and believable, the kind of life story you hear from thousands of ordinary people. Looking back now, that was probably the moment the real connection started to form. Not because anything dramatic happened that night, but because everything felt comfortable. Almost too comfortable. At the time, I believed those meetings had been simple coincidence. But now, remembering how often our paths crossed before we ever exchanged numbers, I sometimes wonder if David had already been paying attention to my routines long before I noticed him. After those first few meetings, my thoughts about David started to linger in ways I hadn't expected. I would catch myself replaying our brief conversations, smiling at his small jokes, and imagining what it would be like to see him again. Not just in the grocery store, but anywhere. Our encounters remained accidental in appearance, yet gradually they became more frequent. Sometimes it was in the park while I was walking my dog, sometimes at the bookstore when I was looking for a recipe book. And somehow David always appeared nearby, ready with that calm, familiar smile, like he had been waiting. At first I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was coincidence, I told myself. Maybe it was just the way our paths naturally crossed in the city. But the more I saw him, the more comfortable I felt in his presence. There was a quiet ease to talking to David that I hadn't felt with anyone else, and slowly, almost without realizing it, I started to trust him completely. We began spending small amounts of time together outside of these chance meetings. A short coffee, a walk by the river, or a shared bench in the park where the world seemed to fade for a little while. And every moment, simple as it was, drew me closer to him. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't explosive, but it was steady. The kind of steady that makes you stop questioning things you normally would. David would tell me about his day, his small victories at work, and sometimes his frustrations. I listened, and he listened back, asking questions, remembering details from conversations we'd had weeks before. The little things that made me realize he actually paid attention. I noticed how he remembered my favorite tea, the small quirks in the way I laughed, and even how I pressed my bag straps when I was nervous. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it mattered. I began to feel that slow, creeping warmth that people call affection. I liked how he never rushed anything, how he respected my space, and yet how naturally he became part of my daily thoughts. He became the person I looked forward to seeing, even when nothing special was happening, just ordinary moments that suddenly felt meaningful. Then came the evenings when we would stay longer than intended, talking until the park lights flickered on. We would sit quietly, sometimes sharing a joke, sometimes just watching the world move past. And in those silences, there was a comfort I hadn't known before. It was in these small, unplanned moments that love began to take root. Not the dramatic kind found in movies, not the sudden sparks that make you dizzy, but the quiet, steady kind that grows in the spaces between conversations, in the way someone remembers the details you thought didn't matter, the kind that slowly convinces you that maybe, just maybe, this person could be part of your life for a long time, longer than anyone else ever has. After months of small, unplanned meetings, the line between coincidence and intentional time together blurred. I started looking forward to seeing David every day. It was no longer just chance. It had become routine in the most natural way, and I didn't mind it at all. One evening, he invited me to a small art exhibition opening. "It's nothing big," he said, brushing off the event like it was casual. Yet I could tell he wanted me to come. I agreed, not knowing that night would change everything. The gallery was quiet, the walls lined with paintings that seemed almost alive under the dim lights. David walked beside me, pointing out details in the artwork I would never have noticed on my own. He had a way of making simple observations feel personal, as if he could see into my thoughts without asking. We laughed, we shared stories, and when the night ended, he walked me to my car. There was a pause before he said, "I hope this isn't too forward, but I'd like to see you again soon." I smiled, and without thinking, I said yes. From that moment, our meetings became intentional. We started talking on the phone, sharing our days, our thoughts, even little secrets we hadn't told anyone else. There was an ease to it that made me feel safe. And the more we talked, the more I realized how much I wanted him in my life. One weekend, David suggested a small road trip to the countryside. Just the two of us, he promised. It was simple, but something about the idea thrilled me. We packed a few things, drove out of the city, and spent the day walking along quiet paths, talking about everything and nothing at the same time. The kind of moments that feel ordinary, yet somehow unforgettable. That evening, under the golden sunset, he turned to me and said, "I can't imagine not having you in my life." His voice was steady, calm, but his words carried a weight that made my chest tighten. For the first time, I realized I was in love. Weeks turned into months, and our relationship deepened. We laughed. We argued lightly over trivial things. We discovered quirks about each other that felt endearing rather than annoying. And through it all, I felt certain he was the one I wanted beside me for life. Then came the moment he asked me to move in with him. The question wasn't dramatic. No big gestures, no over-the-top proposal. Just a quiet, "Would you like to live with me?" And I said yes without hesitation. It felt natural, the way our story had always unfolded. Accidental beginnings, gradual closeness, and now a future that seemed inevitable. Looking back, I had no idea how deeply I had allowed myself to trust him, or how unknowingly I was stepping closer to a life that would soon change completely. Forever. Months passed, and David and I had settled into a rhythm that felt effortless. We spent weekends exploring quiet corners of the city, sometimes wandering into small bookstores, sometimes sitting at parks, just talking. Nothing dramatic ever happened. Yet every ordinary moment felt layered with meaning, as if our lives had slowly intertwined without either of us noticing. One chilly evening, David suggested a walk along the river. The city lights reflected in the water, and the streets were almost empty. He walked beside me, close enough that our arms brushed occasionally, small, subtle touches that sent warmth through me. He didn't say much at first, just let the silence stretch, letting the moment speak for itself. Finally, he turned to me and said, "I know we haven't been together for very long, but it feels like I've known you forever." His voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice that made you believe every word. Yet there was something in the pause that made my heart race, as if he was holding back something more. I smiled nervously, unsure if I should say something. "I feel the same," I admitted quietly. It was true. I had never felt this level of comfort with anyone else. Not even close. A few days later, David invited me to his apartment. It was modest, warm, and filled with little details that made it feel lived in. A small bookshelf lined one wall. Photographs on the table captured moments that weren't ours. Yet somehow I imagined we could create our own memories there. He brewed tea while I settled on the couch, and the conversation drifted from mundane topics to hopes and dreams. The kind of things you only share when you feel safe. That evening, as we stood near the window looking out at the city lights, David took my hand in his. "I don't want this to end," he said softly. "I want us to build a life together." There was no grand gesture, no dramatic ring, just a simple, heartfelt truth, and in that moment, I believed him completely. Over the next few months, our discussions shifted from casual plans to more serious conversations. We talked about moving in together officially, about finances, about families. It all felt natural, like steps that were meant to happen in sequence. Nothing forced, nothing rushed. Just a life we were quietly building together. Then came the night he asked me to marry him. We were walking back from a quiet dinner, the streets empty except for the soft hum of traffic. He stopped, looked at me with that same calm expression and said, "I don't have a fancy speech or a ring, but I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me?" And without hesitation, I said yes. We celebrated quietly, telling close family and friends, laughing over small details and planning the ceremony. Nothing extravagant, nothing over the top. Just a commitment we both felt deeply. And as the days passed, I began to imagine our future together. A life of ordinary moments made extraordinary simply because we were together. Little did I know, behind all the calm smiles and quiet assurances, the life I was building with David was about to unravel. And everything I thought I knew about him would soon be called into question. After about 8 months of dating, we got married. It felt like the natural step after everything we had shared. Life at first was calm and predictable. Mornings with coffee, weekends cooking together, laughing at little things. Everything felt steady and comfortable, ordinary yet perfect. Over time, small details began to stand out. David's phone lying face down, messages disappearing quickly, a distracted glance when I asked a question. Nothing alarming, but enough to make me pause and wonder. He never lied to me directly, at least not when I could see, but sometimes his words felt measured, as if he was choosing exactly what I was allowed to know. I noticed it, but pushed the thought aside, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe work stress, or the way some people keep parts of themselves private. Our weekends remained full of laughter and small adventures. Yet there were evenings when he would go unusually quiet, staring at his phone for long minutes. When I asked, he would smile, dismiss the question, and continue as if nothing had happened. And the emptiness of those moments left me uneasy, a quiet doubt I didn't want to confront. Still, I loved him deeply. I wanted to believe in the man I married, to trust the life we were building. I focused on ordinary joys, morning coffee together, cooking meals, lazy Sunday afternoons on the couch. Each day felt like another layer of our life, another brick in the foundation we were quietly constructing. Solid, steady, familiar. But cracks were forming, subtle at first. He sometimes disappeared for hours without explanation. His laughter occasionally felt forced, and his smile could hide something I couldn't yet name. I didn't confront him, not yet. I wanted to hold on to the life we had created even as unease quietly crept in. Small arguments began too. Trivial disagreements over chores, groceries, or minor details. They weren't serious, but each left a lingering aftertaste, a reminder that our life wasn't as seamless as it appeared. Sometimes I would catch him looking at me in a way that made my heart sink, distant, almost calculating. But then he would smile and the moment passed. Even then, I refused to believe anything was wrong. I clung to our shared routines, the warmth of his hand, the quiet stability of our mornings. Yet deep down, a subtle tension had begun to grow, an unspoken question lingering at the edge of my thoughts. Was the calm life I trusted really what it seemed, or just a carefully maintained illusion? Months passed, and life settled into a rhythm. Yet beneath the ordinary routine, a quiet unease had begun to grow. David's work hours became unpredictable, sometimes leaving early in the morning, returning late at night. He smiled, joked, acted as if nothing had changed. But I noticed the small shifts. A phone left face down, brief pauses when he answered messages, a glance that lingered too long before he looked away. One evening I returned home earlier than expected, hoping to surprise him with dinner, and the apartment was dim and almost empty of life, the door slightly ajar, a detail that made my chest tighten as I assumed he had just stepped out. But something felt off. Inside, his coat lay neatly on the couch, a half-empty cup of coffee still steaming on the table. I called his name, my voice echoing softly, but no answer came, and the quiet pressed against me, heavy and suffocating, making me shiver at the thought of what might be happening in my absence. While waiting for him, my gaze fell on his phone, carelessly left on the counter. I picked it up almost instinctively, and the screen lit up. A message preview caught my eye from an unfamiliar name, simple words that made my stomach twist. "Can't wait to see you tonight. It's been too long." I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the screen, then opened the message fully. There was nothing explicit, nothing beyond a quiet suggestion of intimacy. Yet it was enough to shatter the illusion I had held so tightly, enough to plant a seed of doubt I could no longer ignore. When David returned moments later, he greeted me with his usual calm smile. He kissed me on the cheek, asked about my day, laughed at a joke I made. The same man I had married, yet not the same. My eyes lingered on him, the messages burning in my mind, the thought growing louder. Parts of his life existed beyond my knowledge, beyond my trust. Over the next few days, I watched him more closely. Quick glances at his phone, hushed conversations, unexplained absences, pieces of a puzzle I had not realized I was assembling. At times I questioned myself. Was I imagining it, letting doubt creep in where there was none? But deep down, the unease persisted, whispering truths I did not want to acknowledge. Then came the night he left for what he said was a business trip. I lingered by the window long after his car disappeared into the distance, the taillights fading until the street was empty. The apartment felt heavier than ever, the silence pressing into me. And in that quiet, I realized the life I had trusted. Calm mornings, shared laughter, the comfort of routine, was more fragile than I had imagined. For the first time, I allowed myself to accept a possibility I had feared. David might not be the man I thought I knew. The life we had built, ordinary and comfortable, could be a carefully constructed illusion. The thought made my chest ache, but I could not turn away. I had to see, to know, before the cracks widened, before the betrayal became impossible to ignore. David returned home later than usual, his calm smile greeting me as always. But tonight, something inside me had shifted. The unease I had been ignoring for months had grown into certainty, and I could no longer pretend everything was fine. I stood in the doorway, phone in hand, my heart pounding, my eyes locked on him. "David, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady, yet heavy with tension. At first, he raised an eyebrow and chuckled lightly, thinking I was overreacting. "What is it now?" he asked, still smiling, as if my seriousness were some joke. I didn't answer immediately. I walked closer, holding the phone in front of me. "Stop pretending. I know everything," I said, letting the weight of my words hang between us. For a moment, his smile faltered, a flicker of unease passing across his face. Then he laughed softly, trying to diffuse the tension. "Everything? You mean what?" "You're imagining things," he said. I didn't flinch. My voice lowered, deliberate and calm. "I'm not imagining anything, David. I know about the messages. I know about her." I pressed the phone into his chest, letting him see the screenshots, the messages, the photos, every intimate detail he had hidden from me. David froze. For the first time, he looked genuinely startled. Then his expression shifted. Disbelief, then panic. "Where did you get these?" he asked, voice tight. I held his gaze. "From your mobile, David. I started noticing things when I suspected something was wrong. I left notes, observations, and one day I saw you entering your password. I remembered it. That's how I accessed your phone." My words were calm, precise, every syllable carrying months of betrayal, fear, and anger. His face darkened, frustration and shame battling for control. "You shouldn't have. This isn't what it looks like," he said, trying to deflect, to explain away his actions, but I could see the cracks forming in his composure. "I don't care what it looks like," I said sharply, stepping closer, my voice breaking slightly under the weight of every lie he had told. "You betrayed me, David. You lied. You cheated. And now, you have to answer, honestly, why you did this." The room grew heavy, charged with tension. I could feel the weight of months of deception pressing down on both of us. David's silence spoke volumes, but I refused to let it intimidate me. I had proof, I had clarity, and most importantly, I had the resolve to confront the man I had trusted, the man who had fractured everything we had built. And in that moment, as his eyes met mine, I realized that this confrontation was only the beginning. The first step in reclaiming the truth, my dignity, and a life where betrayal would no longer have a place. And in that moment, as his eyes meet mine, I realized that this confrontation is only the beginning. The first step in reclaiming the truth, my dignity, and a life where betrayal will no longer have a place. If this had been an arranged marriage, maybe there would have been an explanation, a reason to understand betrayal. But in a love marriage, there is no reason, only choice. And David has made his choice. I have already filed the divorce papers, and with that decision comes the weight of everything I feel, the hurt, the deception, the moments I thought were real, now revealed as an illusion. David tries to talk, to explain, to justify, but I have all the proof. Messages, images, moments of intimacy I discovered for myself. They leave no doubt that he was with someone else and intentionally hiding it. Every picture, every line, every unread notification reminds me that trust once broken cannot simply be repaired. Seeing all of it brings clarity, and I know what must be done. I realize I can no longer remain silent. I cannot accept excuses. In love, betrayal is a choice, and when someone chooses to break the life we build together, it is not my responsibility to tolerate it. I decide that my life is mine to control, and I will not allow this betrayal to define me or take away my peace. On the day I file the papers at the courthouse, I feel a strange mix of relief, sorrow, and empowerment. David sees the documents, disbelief and shame in his eyes, the familiar mask gone. He tries to speak, to justify himself, but I do not listen. My decision is final. The divorce is more than legal paperwork. It is a declaration of my dignity and self-respect, and I refuse to let anyone violate that. Walking back to my apartment, I think about the life we imagined, the calm mornings, the laughter, the small, ordinary joys. It will never return. Yet in that loss, I find clarity. I'm standing up for myself, my life, and my values. Betrayal has taken much, but it has not taken my strength, my ability to act, or my power to move forward. Guys, now I turn to you. Yes, you watching this. Because even when a decision feels right, when clarity is here, we still seek perspective. I ask you, quietly, but with the weight of everything I feel. Tell me, should I forgive David and try to move forward, or should I take the divorce and reclaim my life? I want to hear your thoughts. Share your perspective and advice in the comments. Your insight can help me see things differently, confirm my choice, or simply remind me that I am not alone. And if you want to follow more stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe.